is Jodie. I'm here in Adelaide today to support and stand with the people of Palestine.
The situation represents with Israel being given weapons and given blatant support from the Australian government to commit a genocide. I think it shows a deep flaw within this society where profit is put before human lives.
I think it's really important to recognize how much the struggles we face are connected and how much Zionism is a threat to human life and welfare everywhere.
Well, I'm here with the Unionists for Palestine, and basically what we are, we're not the union structure, we're the members of trade unions, and we're appealing to all the people that are workers mainly to harass their unions to do more for the Palestinian people.
It's not really a fair conflict because you've got one side that's got the most sophisticated army in the world completely decimating basically a people's under siege. So Gaza is basically the world's largest open air prison, and the Israelis are just going in there slaughtering indiscriminately.
The actions of the Australian government are a complete demonstration of corruption and a deep moral failing within Western culture.
Here in Australia, our government is responsible in arming this genocide that is going on and supporting this state, this terrorist state, for the past 76 years. So we must oppose it. Here, and the cost of living crisis, climate crisis, femicide issues here in Australia all relate back to the disgusting ideology of Zionism. Our struggles are connected and we must use our voice united to fight against it. The anti-war movement is only just started, and we will see a free Palestine.
We acknowledge that we're holding this National Day of Action for Gaza and Palestine on the lands of the Ghana people. We pay our respects to elders past and present and extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here today. We also acknowledge that sovereignty of the lands across this vast continent of over 250 nations has never been ceded. In addition to our rally today, on this National Day of Action, rallies are being held in Perth, Darwin, Cairns, Gold Coast, Port Macquarie, Sydney, Canberra, Melbourne and Hobart. An amazing effort. Thank you to our friends at APAN for coordinating this National Day of Action. We're holding this National Day of Action Australia-wide to demand that the Australian government acts to end Israel's genocide of the Palestinian people in Gaza. We're holding this rally to demand that the Australian government acts to end the occupation and Israel's apartheid rule of the Palestinian people. Yes. As we edge closer to an anniversary that we all hoped we would never reach, 12 months of genocide, 12 months of the Australian government watching on as day after day, minute after minute, Israel unleashes its humanity and earth-shattering assault on Gaza. As we approach this dreaded anniversary, we pause, and we pause to mourn the many, many thousands of women, children and men killed and injured by the apartheid state of Israel. The 2 million Palestinians, 9 in 10 Gazans, who have been uprooted and forcibly displaced by Israeli bombings and land assaults. We pause to remember the people in the West Bank who have been murdered and their homes and livelihoods destroyed, continuing after 76 long years. And we pause to remember the Palestinian people's 100-year struggle for justice and freedom in their homeland. We also pause to mourn and remember the journalists, aid workers, medical staff, who should still be alive, but who have been eliminated and silenced. We pause to thank the courageous governments, not ours, but there are a few, communities, organisations and individuals, every single one of you, here and all over the world, who have stood united against injustice, genocide, occupation and apartheid. And we pause to pay respect to the people of occupied Palestine who, like their foremothers and forefathers, continue to resist their oppressors with courage and resilience, with heartbreak and hope. In 1946, people said we didn't know. Today, no one can say they don't know. They can only say they didn't want to know, or they knew and they still said and did nothing. Today, as we approach that anniversary, we say to the Australian government, stop pretending you don't know. We know that you know the truth. Stop deflecting, dissembling. We don't want to hear your concerns anymore. We want you to act. We want you to tell the truth and take decisive action to end a genocide, occupation and apartheid. We want you to say and do the lawful and right thing. We want you to act on your duty under international law, rather than fiddling around with motions that will never see the light of day at the UN. We want you to end all support of apartheid Israel. Political, economic, trade, cultural and sporting. We want to see sanctions in all of these areas. You know as well as we know that Israel will never stop unless they are treated like the pariah state that they are. And we say to the Australian government, show some human decency and moral integrity and speak and act on behalf of justice and freedom for the Palestinian people. To the Palestinians amongst us, we say once again, we stand next to you, beside you, and will continue to do so until Palestine is free. As Nelson Mandela said, our freedom is incomplete without the freedom of Palestinians. Thank you all very much for being here on this important day. We have 5 speakers today before we set off on our march. Our first speaker and friend is Australian Greens Senator Sarah Hanson-Young, thank you, Sarah, who has been a senator for South Australia since 2008. In the last year, the Greens have been calling for an end to the occupation of Palestine and consistently called Israel's action in Gaza a genocide. I don't think we've heard those words from the Australian government. And the Greens continue to call for sanctions against Israel and justice for Palestine. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you so much for having me today. Of course, I acknowledge that we stand here gathered on the lands of the Kaurna people and pay my respects to their elders past and present and emerging, and thank them for their generosity, kindness and compassion. And it's that generosity, kindness and compassion that brings us all here today. Because what we can see happening in Gaza is a human-made catastrophe. It is human-made suffering. It is a war crime, and it is a genocide. And it is time for Australia to do more than just utter words, wring hands. It is time for Australia to step up and take the power that we have as part of the international community to take real action. And I call on the Albanese government today, if you don't want to see what's happened in Gaza happening in Lebanon, the Minister Wong said she didn't want another Gaza. Now is the time to speak clearly, speak loudly, and use actions, not just words. It is almost 12 months since we first started gathering on the steps here to call for action as the unspeakable horrors started unfolding. And I want to say, of course we call and want any hostages to be released back to their families and their loved ones. We want the bombs to stop falling on innocent children and innocent people. We want a ceasefire that is real. We want recognition that is genuine. And we want to make sure that Australia ends that two-way arms trade with Israel. If you care about human life, then act like you do. The horrors of the past 12 months. And how many more times do we have to see the suffering of innocent children on our television screens, on our social media feeds? How many more journalists or aid workers need to die before the world says enough is enough? How many more rallies of hundreds and thousands of Australians, compassionate, heartfelt moments of collective action? How much more of this do we need before our government understands that enough is enough and it is time for action? We of course need to see the government sanction the extremist war cabinet in Israel. There's just no excuse for this. Absolutely no excuse. And we don't need a dragged out time frame for the recognition of Palestine. That is something the Australian government has the power to do itself right now. And if we want to recognise Palestine, the Albanese government can do it today, and I call on them to do that.
End the occupation now! 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 End the occupation now!
Thank you. Absolutely. End the occupation now, compassion now, human rights now, and no more of supporting the war criminals. I just want to thank you all for coming out today, because I know that this is a hard thing to do. And people have been consistently doing this week after week after week, and people right across the country are doing this today. Thank you for showing the leadership. Thank you for showing that Australians care. Thank you for showing what compassion and human rights and justice looks like. If it wasn't for people like you, as a politician, I wouldn't be able to do what I do. I wouldn't be able to stand in the parliament and fight the fight for you, for justice, for human rights. You give me strength, you give me inspiration, and I tell you what, we need more of it than ever before. Because what is going on right now, the situation in Gaza is deteriorating, but it's deteriorating more broadly. And it is time for leadership and moral courage from our community leaders, from our politicians, and from our government. Thank you very much for having me today. I stand with you. I stand with you, and I stand with the tens of thousands of innocent children who have suffered because of badly behaved and power-hungry men. And it is time that that is shut down, that that is called out, and that Australia says enough is enough. We are not going to be a part of it. Thank you very much for having me, everybody.
Thank you, Sarah. If we give you inspiration and hope, you also give us inspiration and hope. Thank you. Please welcome Kailesh Govinda. Kailesh is an Adelaide Uni student activist and a member of Students for Palestine Adelaide. Thank you, Kailesh.
Free, free Palestine!
Free, free Palestine!
Free, free Palestine!
Free, free Palestine!
Long live Palestine!
Long live Palestine!
Long live Palestine!
Long live Palestine!
Hello everyone, I'm Kailesh, and today I want to talk about what we've done in the year of war and genocide, opposing the brutal, murderous Israeli state and their war on Gaza. Reflecting on a year of brutal war and genocide in Palestine, we have seen the lengths to which our leaders can sanction the killing of thousands of innocent Palestinian lives and now Lebanese lives to maintain their imperialist interests across the Middle East. We have seen how institutions of justice, the ICJ, the UN, they aren't actually for justice if it doesn't suit the priorities of the states that control them. But we've also seen throughout history and throughout this year that where there is oppression and injustice, there is always resistance to that oppression and injustice. But that resistance isn't always organic. It is something that has to be organized. And I am proud to be part of some of the most impressive solidarity campaigns by students for Palestine in history. New layers of young people have witnessed the crimes of the system and their leaders against Palestinians and decided that the only force that we can rely on is ourselves to demand justice for Palestinians. So today I'm going to take you through some of those organizing that we've done this year. I want to start with the school strikes for Palestine last year, because it can slip our minds that one of the earliest, most significant global solidarity acts for Palestine came from the thousands of impressive high school students around the world defying their principals, their administration, marching out of their classrooms and demanding an end to the complicity of their governments in genocide. As one student said, "We cannot pretend that this isn't the biggest crime our generation has seen. We cannot be silent as Israel kills kids in cold blood. We cannot accept what our principals are saying, that this is a war with equal sides." From San Francisco to London, thousands of students across the world marched out. Here in Australia, we can be proud of the fact that Students for Palestine organised the world's largest school strike for Palestine with over 4,000 students in Melbourne alone. Here in Adelaide, we had 2 school strikes with over 200 students organising in their schools and coming out in solidarity. Learning more about history in a few weeks of activism than they have in months and even years in the classroom, this is what they told me. High school students led the way and showed what the adults in charge really are: cowardly, compliant apologists for Israeli apartheid. Over the course of the year, we held weekly rallies for Palestine. We staged the train station occupation. We plastered the Department of Foreign Affairs with hundreds of pages listing the names of known Palestinians murdered, and we occupied the ground floor of Penny Wong's office. We
In Adelaide, business cannot go on as usual when our government is not just complicit, but actively contributing to the murder of Palestinians. And this is particularly important in South Australia under a Premier who wants to make our state the defence state, producing the very weapons that can be used to mount war on the oppressed everywhere. Shame! And now on to the student encampments. Earlier this year, across the US, students erected camps across their universities, demanding an end to the genocide and a breaking of all ties to Israel's war on Gaza. We saw how quickly universities, the supposed bastions of critical inquiry and liberal values, can be turned into armed zones occupied by cops, filled with fear and repression to defend the interests of the ruling class. Shame! Shame! But the veil of US democracy was torn to shreds when students highlighted the deep links between weapons manufacturers, universities and their governments, and all of their complicity in Israel's genocide. We should be proud of the fact that it was Students for Palestine at Sydney University that established the first Palestine solidarity encampment outside the US in the world. We asserted our support for the US students, but also that the encampment campaign for Palestine should not be confined to the US. It should be a global campaign against war machines that exist on every campus around the world, providing the very means for genocide and imperialism. Over those months, university encampments sprung up across the world, from France to India, from Argentina to Egypt, from Canada to the UK. We set up solidarity encampments on every major Australian campus: Melbourne, La Trobe, ANU, UQ, Wollongong. And Students for Palestine at Adelaide University set up a month-long encampment. Engaging with students around the clock, having public meetings and educationals, heckling university management, organising daily rallies, demanding that our university disclose and cut their ties with companies like Boeing and Lockheed Martin who supply the IDF. Shame on Adelaide Uni, shame! These encampments continued in the face of uni management and the state across Australia trying to stifle any criticism of Israel. Students were accused of anti-Semitism, suspensions, baseless accusations of a threat to student safety, and some were even met with physical violence from Zionists. Shame! But our response was to remain steadfast. We refused to be threatened. We held protests to defend our camps and called out management on their hypocrisy and their blatant contempt for free speech and their support for genocide. We knew we were on the right side of history. Most recently, Students for Palestine organised student general meetings across student campuses. These are official meetings where motions are put forth to the student population to vote on regarding the university. And some of these universities have not had general meetings since the 90s. At Adelaide Uni, students voted on 3 motions: that the university stands in solidarity with Palestinians by calling for a ceasefire and signing on to the BDS movement, that they divest from weapons companies with ties to ongoing genocide in Gaza, and that they drop all disciplinary actions and campus bans on activists who took part in the encampments, and similar motions were put forth in other campuses. All 3 motions were carried at Adelaide University, with over 200 students unanimously voting for these demands. And at every general meeting across Australian campuses, all these motions were passed. And this is significant because it tells us that the genocide in Palestine is not a fringe issue among students. You couldn't say the same 10 years ago. and it is one that students oppose. They oppose the gearing of their education towards defence and war. They oppose the ongoing green-lighting of the Albanese Labour government towards genocide and war across the Middle East. And it also means for us that the fight has to go on campus. In contrast to the sentiment among students, uni management and the government has continued its crackdown on pro-Palestine activism by smearing it with anti-Semitism accusations. There's been shame. A Senate committee is currently looking to investigate the hotbed of anti-Semitism on Australian campuses. Albanese has given into this by establishing a judicial inquiry into anti-Semitism at Australian universities. Shame. We know this is all a means to curb activism on campus, to curb any criticism of Israel and question any ties to military that our universities might have. And our response is actually to not give in, but to continue organising and calling out our leaders in their hypocrisy. The only way to defend our right to freedom of speech is not to give in, but to continue mobilising in the streets. And we have only our conviction that we stand on the right side of history. The recent bombing of Lebanon is an open threat of broader regional war by Israel. Let's be clear, the continued green lighting and apologising for Israel's crimes by Biden, by Albanese, by Penny Wong for the genocide in Gaza is what has given Israel free rein to expand. When we say in our thousands, in our millions, we are all Palestinians, it is not just a chant of solidarity. It is a reminder to us all that the ability for ruling classes to mount inhumane violence on Palestinians means that they can mount such violence to any group, anywhere in the world. Be it tear gassing and beating up of protesting students, the detention and torture of refugees in Australia, or the expansion of war onto Lebanon, our freedoms will always be tied to that of Palestinians. And that is why the struggle, the organising on the ground has to continue, and students are not stopping.
Thank you, Kailash. I think I speak for everyone here and people not here to say how proud we are of students and for the students who have stood up in their hundreds and thousands, in their millions across the world. As we know, in history, it's students who lead the charge against injustice. And in Adelaide, we are very, very fortunate to have young people, whether they're at high school or at uni, through Students for Palestine Adelaide, to lead the march for freedom and for justice. So thank you, Kailash, and thank you everyone in Students for Palestine. I'd like to introduce Mike Kissam, who's a long-time anti-war campaigner and advocate for justice for Palestine and Lebanon. He was the convener of the movements against the Iraq War and the wars on Afghanistan and Iraq. Mike is also, as you know, a member of the AFOPA Executive Committee. Please welcome Mike.
Thank you, Kristen. We've seen for over a year the indifference of Western governments, and for that matter, Arab governments, to the loss of life and the suffering of the Palestinian people. We're now seeing that indifference extended to the people of Lebanon. The ruthlessness with which the Israelis respond to their enemies with the massacres of civilians hasn't changed. Their rule book for Gaza is their rule book for Lebanon, and their rule book for Lebanon is one they've employed before. Lebanon has suffered under the Israelis for well over 50 years. In 1968, they went to Beirut airport and they blew up 13 airliners to punish the Lebanese government for allowing the Palestinian resistance to live in Lebanon. The Israeli government is not interested They're not interested in dealing with the source of the conflict. They're not interested with ending their occupation. They're not interested in peace. They're not interested in coexistence with either the Palestinians or the neighbouring Arab states. The Israeli government is about domination. They're about domination enforced through military force with the backing of the Americans, who we are told are an independent government but who seem to act as an arm of the Israeli government. The slaughter that we've seen in Gaza for 12 months has changed the world in many ways. People have seen it and they've said things cannot be the same again. They've seen it and they recognise that the international system has failed. Something that is so blatant, something that is so well documented, something that is so horrendous, going on and on and on, that the people of the world will rise about it. They'll rise against it. There are protests all over the world. Only the obstacle is when it hits the level of government. And we've seen that in Australia. But the Israelis, through their own actions, have revealed the sort of people they are. They've revealed their agenda. They've revealed their disinterest in peace. And they've revealed that their solution to every problem is killing. Either killing ordinary people or killing the leadership that opposes them. Israel will not be seen the same way again. The movement that has started now has to maintain itself, and it has to have a very clear focus. We need to focus on the fact that this problem is born of the nature of the Israeli state. That we have an apartheid state. It exists to facilitate the colonisation of the Palestinian territories, and it is not going to stop unless it's stopped by the external world, by us and by our governments when we can get them to act. Just 2 months ago, Israel assassinated Ismail Haniyeh, the head of Hamas. At the time, people recognised what Israel was doing is not finding a way to create a better world. When they destroy Hamas, they're not going to give the Palestinian people the same rights of the Israeli people. They're not going to stop killing the people in Gaza, starving the people in Gaza. They're not going to stop building on the West Bank. Their solution is always to kill, to move forward, as the Americans say, to double down, to defy world opinion. 2 months ago they killed Ismail Haniyeh. It was commented at the time, Ismail Haniyeh was the man they had to negotiate with to get their hostages back. Ismail Haniyeh was the person who would be negotiating for the thousands of Palestinian prisoners that the Israelis can pick up at will, that they torture on a regular basis, as has been exposed by the Israeli human rights organisations and Palestinians themselves and Amnesty International. They killed the man that they had to negotiate with for their precious prisoners. They killed the man they had to negotiate with to get peace in Gaza because they weren't interested in peace. Now, from day one, Hezbollah in Lebanon took a very simple stance. They said this is a genocide. The entire world came to recognise that there was a genocide, that this was the just unfettered killing of innocent people with no military outcome, with the destruction of their societies. And the response of Hezbollah, who we are told are the bad guys, the response of the Houthis in Yemen, was to say, we will put pressure on Israel until Israel stops massacring people in Gaza. That is the demand that the whole world should have been raising. That is the demand that was raised by Hezbollah. And as I said last week, Hezbollah targeted Israeli military targets for the last year. They put pressure on Israel to force Israeli troops out of Gaza, to stop their genocide. And the Houthis put pressure on boats, ships going to Israel, carrying munitions, carrying weapons. This exercise caused the shutdown of the port of Eilat at the southern end of Israel and put pressure on the Israeli economy. These are the people that had explicitly said We are doing this to end a genocide. Simple. Israel has that option of ending a genocide, but they do not want to end a genocide. They want the ethnic cleansing of Palestine. They want the extermination of the Palestinians. They've extended into the West Bank, and now with the murder of the leadership of Hezbollah, including Mr. Nasrallah, they have again shown that murder is their weapon of choice. It doesn't matter how many innocent Lebanese die for Israel to kill who it wants to kill in Lebanon. It doesn't matter that the people they're killing are the people they need to negotiate with. Even the miserable Sunday Mail, that pathetic excuse for a newspaper, found space in a column today to say that Israel has killed the man that it needs to negotiate with for peace. That Israel has killed a man who was a moderating voice in Hezbollah. Why would they say he's a moderating voice? Because Hezbollah has carefully calibrated their response. They are not a superpower like Israel. They calibrated their response against Israel to military targets to put military pressure on this criminal state to stop a massacre of civilians. Where so many people wanted to see Israel obliterated for what they're doing. The leadership in Lebanon and the leadership in Iran recognises that there is no benefit in a world war, there's no benefit in a regional war. And the pressure that was put on Israel is the same pressure that the rest of the world should be doing. Targeted pressure to end this genocide, and we need to keep pressure to end the apartheid regime. The issue for us and the struggle for us going into the future are these crimes cannot be allowed to occur. The world has seen the uselessness of all the mechanisms of international peace, international governance. It is only the externals, the people like us, the mass movements that are going to make that difference, to say that it is the nature of Israel which is the problem, and it is the nature of Israel which must be tackled in an anti-apartheid movement. And our government and the federal opposition, the spineless, useless talking heads, have to be made to understand that words are not enough. They need to understand that if they can turn around when the Americans send them the memo and ship armaments to Ukraine, where the situation in no way parallels the depravity of what Israel has done to Gaza, our government needs to understand that they can do more for Palestine, and if they want to do something for peace, they need to get the Israeli mad dog under control. Our challenge is not to give in to depression and despair at all the evil in the world, at the monsters that run Israel, at the monsters that run the United States, at the monsters, the cowards in Canberra. Our challenge is to fight them, and we need to do that. We need to do that for everybody in the world, for the safety of everybody in the world, not just for the Palestinians that are being murdered, and not just for the Lebanese to be murdered, but for all of us.
Thank you, Mike, for those impassioned pleas. You know, I was in Palestine in 2019, and on a very micro level, can I just tell you one very tiny story that illustrates what Mike said about they will never stop until every Palestinian is dead or has left. My daughter and I stayed in East Jerusalem, but we had to go to Tel Aviv to vote, 2019 election. And we had to get a taxi, and of course it was an Israeli taxi driver. And after talking to us about where we were from and what we did, and after finding out where we were staying in East Jerusalem and spending most of our time in the West Bank, he said to us, and this just illustrates one person, but it is the practice and the theory of the Zionist regime. He said, next time you come back, there will not be one Arab left in this country. Shame. I'd like to introduce you to Hussam El Assad, who's a member of Adelaide's Palestinian community and recently joined AFOPA's executive committee. Hussam's Palestinian parents and their families are 1948 refugees from Palestine. Thank you, Hussam.
The horrors that we have witnessed over the last 12 months are no different from what Israel has done to Palestine and to Palestinians over the last 76 years. The intensity of those horrors in a condensed timeline has enabled all of us, the whole world, to see Israel for what it is, a settler colonial project that is barbaric, brutal and ruthless. More than this, it's enabled the whole world to see who supports Israel and what they stand for. Western civility has been shown to be a veneer, a thin veneer, and it's curious to see just how quickly and easily that veneer was removed. And indeed, citizens of the West, people like you and I, have experienced just how fragile our rights and freedoms are. And we have all seen just how thin that line is, the line that separates democracy from fascism. What occurred on October the 7th did not occur in a vacuum. It was the response of a resistance movement to what was, leading up to October the 7th, the bloodiest year on record for Palestinians since 2005. That is, since when the United Nations first started recording Palestinian casualties. What happened on October the 7th was an act of last resort. It is the sort of thing that we would expect from an occupied, oppressed peoples who have exhausted all diplomatic avenues. It is the sort of thing that we would expect from an entrapped population whose pleas have fallen on deaf ears. It is the sort of thing we would expect after precious time and resources are wasted by international diplomats philosophising and pontificating a completely unworkable, unrealisable two-state solution, thereby turning the plight of the Palestinians into a can that is perpetually kicked down the road. Israel's account of what happened on October the 7th painted the occupied Palestinians as barbaric, and it rendered the occupier Israelis as a hapless, civilised victim. Australia, through its ministers, our Australian government, adopted that narrative in its entirety. And our ministers, and in particular Penny Wong, parroted the self-professed, Israel's self-professed right to defend itself. Since then, Israel's accounts of what happened on October the 7th have been debunked and discredited by Western media, no less. That is, Israel lied. Moreover, under international law, there is no such thing as an Israeli right of self-defense. It does not exist. In 2004, the International Court of Justice stated clearly that Israel has no right to defend itself in respect of territories that it occupies. Our Foreign Minister, Penny Wong, was quick to condemn the events of October 7. And it took her government 10 months to call for a ceasefire after the first bombs were dropped on Gaza. Notably, Penny Wong has not condemned the murder of over 40,000 Palestinians in Gaza. Penny Wong has not condemned the reduction by Israel of Gaza to rubble. Penny Wong has not condemned the forced displacement of 2.3 million Palestinians from their homes. However, Penny Wong has provided some lofty statements about Palestinian rights of self-determination, something about the rights of Palestinians to statehood, something about Australia's commitment to a two-state solution, and something about needing to respect the rules of war and international law. It's curious for Australia's Arabic population to hear these words, and for Australia's Arabic population, we don't really listen to what Penny Wong says, we look at what she does. And the message that Penny Wong has given to Australia's Arabic population, Palestinians and now Lebanese, is as follows. The wholesale slaughter of over 40,000 of your fellow men and women is not something that is worthy of condemnation. The message from Penny Wong is that the wholesale destruction of Gaza, the wholesale destruction of its civilian infrastructure, rendering it uninhabitable, the displacement of 2.3 million people, and now the bombing of Lebanon, the killing of Lebanese civilians and the bombing of Lebanese civilian infrastructure is not something that is worth condemning. It's not even something that we feel should change our business as usual arrangements with Israel. It's not something that we feel is worth sanctions. It's not something that we feel is worth embargoes. It's not something that we will revisit our diplomatic relations with Israel over. Certainly not something that we're going to call the Israeli ambassador and talk to them about our concerns. And so, whilst Penny Wong remains in office, her legacy is set. Clearly set. It is a legacy of double standards. It is a legacy of hypocrisy. It is a legacy of selectivity, a selective empathy, and with it, a selective humanity, a selective application of the international framework of humanitarian law, a selective truth, a selective implementation of red lines and the theatre of anger that we have come to expect when those lines are crossed. That is, Penny Wong's legacy has reinforced the sense of prejudice that Australia's Arabic population feels in the international world stage. Penny Wong has made it clear that she does not represent people like me. And by indulging Israeli lies, by indulging Israeli contravention of international law, by indulging Israel's mockery of a rule-based order and by erroneously applying international law. Penny Wong has demonstrated that she is not fit to represent people like me. Penny Wong's legacy is one that I am sure her two daughters will grow up to be ashamed of. If there's one thing that the last 12 months has shown us, it's that truth is something that we have to fight for and fight hard for. Because without truth, there can be no justice. And without justice, there can be no humanity. On a final point, it seems that everybody who is not Palestinian knows what's in the best interests of Palestinians without consulting with them. All this business of a Palestinian state, some abstract Palestinian state or a two-state solution, well, standing up here, I tell you what I, as an Australian of Palestinian heritage, seek. I don't want some abstract Palestinian state to be created. I don't want a two-state solution. What I seek, what I demand, is the restoration of the Palestinian homeland that was stolen and continues to be stolen from Palestinians to this very day. Free Palestine. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hussam, for reminding us of the complete failure of this government, both in words, deeds and actions, to bring about justice and humanity for the Palestinian people. Our final speaker today, before we set off, or before we have a few announcements, is Robert Stainsby.
So if you went to the fundraiser last week with the excellent film, The Last Sky, you would have heard the filmmaker Nicholas Hanna talking about the importance of direct action here in so-called Australia for Palestine. And he gave the example of how he provided legal support to the hundreds of activists at Port Botany in so-called Sydney, blockading a ship from the Zim Israeli shipping line. This was one of several blockades of Zim ships around the country in the ports where they call. And it was organised by our group, Unionists for Palestine. Now, Unionists for Palestine was inspired by the proud history of unions in Australia, using their collective strength, including our most powerful tools, work bans, stopping work, for solidarity with Indonesia, to stop the Vietnam War and to end apartheid in South Africa. Now, Unionists for Palestine has been a rank and file initiative, so from grassroots union members. In October last year, we saw our peak body, the ACTU, put out a pretty terrible or weak statement, both sides type of statement, and so we knew we needed to do more than that. Our attitude is that we'll work with union leaders when we can, but we will push them into action when we need to. And we've achieved quite a bit. Here on Ghana Yurta, we worked with the Maritime Union to organise a march through Port Adelaide on a national No Trade with Apartheid Day of Action. Some of our members joined a blockade of Rosebank Engineering in Wingfield which manufactures parts for Israel's F-35 jets. We have activists working in many unions, and we support each other across unions. We've also taken Palestine solidarity into other disputes that have come up. And when the ACTU made a welcome improvement in their policy last April, starting to call for an end to the military trade with Israel and sanctions against Israeli officials, we gathered outside their Congress here to leaflet the delegates and urge them to turn the better position into action, to bring members together to rally and to apply bans to enforce these positions. Now, there have also been many highlights interstate, such as teachers publishing resources to raise awareness of the issue in their classrooms and defying attempts to discipline them. University staff have organised through their union bodies to back students camping out for Palestine. They met in hundreds to vote to support BDS, to cut ties with Israeli unis and with the companies arming Israel. And in Naarm, we saw members of the Australian Services Union, great to see some of their flags here today, stopping work, defying Australia's anti-strike laws and stopping work to demand that the community organisations they work for stand up for Palestine. Now, I have to give special mention to the construction union, the CFMEU. They've spoken at our rallies here, they spoke at the ACTU Congress for Palestine. In Naarm, they've flown Palestinian flags off cranes on building sites. In Canberra, they stopped work to support the student encampment. And the aim of the attacks on the CFMEU now is to, they're under attack from the media and the government. And I think that's something that's very familiar to all of us here in the movement for Palestine. And the reason they're being attacked is that the government is trying to stop them doing their effective work, protecting their members, and to bring them back under the reins of the anti-strike and anti-union laws that we shamefully have in this country. And these same laws stand in the way of us now, repeating what unions did for Vietnam and South Africa. Now, our next focus as Unionists for Palestine, Ghana Yoda, is the South Australian Labor Convention here on the 19th of October, just down the road at the Convention Centre. Now, as Unionists, Labor makes the claim that it represents us. So we want to bring together everyone we can, whether they're Labor members, Labor voters, or neither of those, to tell the delegates at the convention to vote for the pro-Palestinian motions that will be put there, and to tell the Labor leaders they need to do better. So we invite everyone here to join us in making that happen. Come along, spread the word. There's flyers being handed out in the crowd. If you haven't got one, come and see one of us and get one, and be part of this. So I think we can take some pride in what Unionists for Palestine has done to date, but we know we've only scratched the surface of what we could do. We've only scratched the surface of what Palestine needs us to do. We do think it's important that we work as Unionists. As Unionists, we're not starting from scratch. We're part of a tradition of touch one, touch all. Touch one, touch all. That extends to workers around the world, workers and their families, in Palestine, in Lebanon, and everywhere else. So we invite everyone who's in the workforce to join us. If you're not already a member of your union, join your union, work with us to get the union movement doing more for Palestine. Help us build that collective strength that can bring apartheid down in Israel.
Has to fall. Touch one, touch all. The occupation has to fall.
The occupation has to fall. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert, and thank you to Unionists for Palestine for the extraordinary work they're doing in a very short amount of time. Can we please thank all of our speakers here today? They've done a marvellous job, as you have indeed here today. What an incredible crowd today. Thank you.